directed, though, at the American people. And why? It's because President Trump is the one from the Oval Office who was making these decisions, who was making these calls, and they were trying to thwart the will, these federal judges, of the American people. They voted him into office. They wanted these things done. And it's so refreshing that the Supreme Court came down with this decision. So, look, it's such a big win. Again, I'll say it, but I wish that some of these people who had obviously suffer from Trump derangement syndrome to such a high degree spent half of their time doing their job, putting actual criminals behind bars versus fighting President Trump. Think about, Charlie, what we could accomplish as a country and how much better off we'd be if these people actually focused on doing what they were elected to do.
Well, precisely.
Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome back to Moderately Black. I'm Lee, your host, and in today's video, we're going to be talking about some of the, I believe it's the injunctions that have happened with the Supreme Court ripping into the lower courts, some of the federal courts, the local federal courts, for basically blocking all of Trump's actions. And it's really crazy to look at how much times these federal courts have tried to obstruct any actions, any presidential actions that President Trump has put out. And when you compare it to other presidents previously, it's very clear that there is a bias, and one would even say some kind of derangement syndrome towards President Trump, and furthermore towards American people, because in this case, American people are the ones that have voted for the very policies that he is trying to put into place. So it's very, very interesting to see the Supreme Court, backing up President Trump here and really handing out injunctions to the lower courts, because obviously they've been really, really biased in their approach. And you will see that, of course, as we go through the video, look at the statistical data. That being said, of course, as we go through the video, I'll give my opinions on it. I don't really have too much to say, but I will still share some thoughts. And of course, I would love to hear your opinions in the comments below. So feel free to drop a comment. If it's your first time here, please be sure to like as well. And let's jump right into the video. Let me know what you think in the comments again.
President Trump declaring victory after his Supreme Court win on legal injunctions.
This was a colossal abuse of power which never occurred in American history prior to recent decades. And we've been hit with more nationwide injunctions than were issued in the entire 20th century together. We can now promptly file to proceed with numerous policies that have been wrongly enjoined on a nationwide basis.
Laura Trump, host of My View with Laura Trump, joins us now. So great to see you this morning. Let's start with this issue of nationwide injunctions that have been issued by federal district courts against presidents lately. President Bush saw 6, Obama saw 12, President Trump saw 64 in his first term, Joe Biden saw 22, and Trump saw 40 just in the first year alone, first 6 months alone of his first term.
And to put that into perspective, right, this is really funny, because the same people who are who are allowing these injunctions to happen and who are supporting these injunctions, the Democrats and leftists that I've spoken to, a lot of them, are the same ones that are going to be hypocrites and say, oh, well, he didn't do anything. Well, how could he have done anything? Especially the first term, when every single way that he turned was blocked. Look at how many injunctions were in place. Literally 64. That is more than 5 times that of Obama, who had 12. That is more than 10 times that of Bush, and that is almost 3 times that of Biden in the single term that Biden was not present for, right? but yeah, if you look at it, it's absolutely insane how many injunctions they have had. So how really can we expect a president to do something if every single action that he's taken is being blocked? Then if you look at the second term, his presidency started in January. At the time of me filming this is June, late June. So we're about to get to that 7-month mark, and we've already gotten to 40 injunctions in just the first 6 months. That's absolutely crazy. There is clearly a bias here. And what's happening is that these federal judges are preventing him from enacting the policies of not only himself, but also the American people, because the American people voted for him and voted for the policies that he will push.
Yeah, Charlie tells you exactly what we all know already, which is that, none of this should have been happening, and it was targeted specifically at President Trump. Look, this was such a big win and such a good moment, not just for the president, but really for America. And I think that it was probably the final nail in the coffin to so much of the lawfare that this president in particular has endured. We know that first it was directed at him personally, his family, his company, and obviously we remember about a year ago, all of that was still going on. This one was directed, though, at the American people. And why? It's because President Trump is the one from the Oval Office who was making these decisions, who was making these calls, and they were trying to thwart the will, these federal judges, of the American people. They voted him into office. They wanted these things done. And it's so refreshing that the Supreme Court came down with this decision. So, look, it's such a big win. Again, I'll say it, but I wish that some of these people who had obviously suffer from Trump derangement syndrome to such a high degree spent half of their time doing their job, putting actual criminals behind bars versus fighting President Trump. Think about, Charlie, what we could accomplish as a country and how much better off we'd be if these people actually focused on doing what they were elected to do.
Well, precisely.
Absolutely. It's so crazy that the same judges that are willing to injunct every, form injunctions for every single policy that Trump tries to implement are the same judges that literally let criminals walk free, actual criminals that are actually, disrupting the American way of life. They're the same ones that are making those criminals walk free. It's absolutely insane to me. And furthermore, I was having a discussion with a family member the other day, and they, when I was asking them, what is it about the right that they hate so much, they really couldn't tell me. And so I got into the discussion with them. I said, if you think about it, being that you're a Christian and being that we're also from, me and that person are, as I said, we're family, so we're from the same country. It's not, you've been told to hate this person, but you probably agree with most of the policies. And then when I ran through the policy lists, and the things that the policies support, they actually agree with most of the policies. And then when I said, would you believe me if I told you that those policies are the ones that are pushed by President Trump? They refuse to accept it. So what's happened is there are so many people that just have a morbid hatred for President Trump that they refuse to accept the policies, and they just don't want to allow anything that he does to pass simply because they don't like him. They literally, like you said, have some form of TDS.
Not only is Trump winning in the courts, he's obviously winning majorly, bigly, as he likes to say, in politics. A new election data reveals that President Trump's base grew younger and more diverse in 2024. If you look into the numbers of Biden's 2020 voters, 79% returned and voted for Harris, 5% switched, 15% just stayed home. Of Trump's 2020 voters, 85% voted for him again, 3% switched to Harris, and 11% didn't come home. So he's winning.
It's interesting that 15% didn't vote at all, 5% switched to Trump, and yet Trump won by a decent margin. I wonder if we look at the numbers from an actual numerical value, if that would make sense. Because if we think about the amount of voters that they say voted for Biden, it was, 80-something million people, which is an extremely high voter turnout. So I wonder if they actually backwork the data, if they would actually see those numbers. It's kind of an interesting thing. But,
not only at the courts, but also in politics.
Yeah, and he also saw huge shifts with these very specific voting blocks, that the Democrats really felt like they owned for so long. You look at young voters, especially young men, 18 to 24 years old, they came out in such a big way for this president. And I think the opportunity that the GOP has right now, and I hope everyone is listening to this, is that some of these people came out for the first time and voted for a Republican. We have an opportunity now to keep those voters. What President Trump is doing, my gosh, Charlie, look at just this this week alone, the wins he scored for the American people. But the Republican Party, I think, as a whole, has an opportunity to keep these voters long term, to keep them for the midterms, to keep them for the next presidential election. And look, they gave us an opportunity to President Trump because he was authentic, he was refreshing, he was willing to go on Theo Vaughn and Joe Rogan and reach out there. So I think we're going to see more wins like this and more polling, hopefully in the future for Republicans like this.
He knows who he
it.
is, and he knows what he thinks, and he's not afraid to share it. And you bring up a really important point. Among new voters who, you would think would be most affected by the insanely negative press coverage, Trump even manages to beat Harris in 2024 among new voters, 14% to 12%.
And I think a big part of the reason for that too is that this younger generation kind of has realized the moral decline. A lot of the younger people in this country have started to see the moral decline associated with the left, because the stuff that they're trying to push and force down our throats, it really has gotten to the point where it became absolutely ridiculous and just absolutely depraved. You could not watch a single movie. You could not make jokes anymore. There was almost no movie that you could watch where some kind of LGBT plus agenda was being pushed onto, like shoved down our throats. People who have kids were having the same issue. I'm actually, while I'm recording here, I was looking at one of my computer screens over there, and just the search bar in the computer screen has an LGBT flag for some reason. What reason is there to have that? Why can't it just say search? It doesn't have to have some gay pride or gay, it doesn't have to push a certain agenda. And I think so many of these young people have shifted, well, not even shifted, but they've been raised in this generation where this has been shoved down their throats, and they realize that it's not necessarily in line with Christian values. And most of them, I think, also have, Christian values. I think that there's been an uptick in Christian values in this country, thank goodness. And, I think because of that, many of these young people have shifted to the right, because a lot of the stuff on the left does not align with Christian values. That's just the bottom line of it. So if I'm going to be honest with you, I think that is a reason why so many new voters went right. And then when we also saw the way that the country was ran over the past 4 to 5 years, can you really blame them? It really can't. I mean, even people who I know who have been lifelong Democrats, a lot of them shifted to the right this election, or just didn't vote at all because they couldn't vote for something that they couldn't vote for the left with the agendas that were being pushed. So yeah, I think that going back to the main topic though, I think that it's really good that the Supreme Court has started to hold these lower federal courts accountable. I think that we also need to have some accountability on the governance of different states, because we have people like the LA mayor and LA governor, Gavin Newsom, and I can't remember the mayor's name right now, the lady, but they're just running their states really into the ground, and they're allowing stupid things to happen, especially when it comes to the immigration issues. And I think these people need to be held accountable for the choices that they're making, because these choices are destroying their states and affecting normal people. So with that being said, thanks so much for watching, everyone. I appreciate you showing up if you did. And if you watched this far, please be sure to drop a like, drop a sub. It does help the channel grow. And of course, drop a comment. I'd like to hear your thoughts. I'd like to go back and forth with you in the comments below. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care.